My friends, welcome to this episode of the Outdoor Gear Review. I hope you all are doing well. What I have here today is a tarp that is made by two companies. VARUSTELEKA, which is a company that you likely haven't heard of before, and also DD Hammocks, which you have likely heard of before. These two companies together have developed the ERAKKO tarp. This is an interesting product, folks, for numerous reasons. First off, this tarp is small. This is an 8.2 foot by 8.2 foot tarp. And that, my friends, is an uncommon size. In Finnish, ERAKKO, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, means hermit. This was designed as a single person tarp. And at the same time, it was designed to be lightweight and compact. You all know that I love using tarps, and as soon as I saw this oddity, I was interested. So I went ahead, purchased it, it arrived, and here we are today. First things first, let's go ahead and let's take a look at what you receive if you decide to purchase this tarp. You don't get much. You receive the oversized storage bag and you receive the tarp, and that's it. No guy lines, no tent stakes, just this and this. I'm going to grab some guy lines, string up this tarp, and then we'll go over every single aspect concerning it. I will also talk about the additional points that I find interesting about this tarp. Again, folks, this is an oddity. With my guy lines here, I like for each one to be 9 feet long, and I like to attach them using slip knots. That way I can quickly remove them and put them in different locations if I need to. If you want to master the use of a tarp, you better learn to adapt that tarp very quickly. You will discover as you use a tarp repeatedly that there's no setup as far as the guy lines go that's going to work for every single situation. And that is why you need to be prepared to make adjustments to your tarp. And that's why slip knots make this so incredibly easy. This model is based upon the DD Hammocks 3 meter by 3 meter tarp. In other words, they're 10 foot by 10 foot tarp. The differences between those tarps are these. This is a simplified, smaller version. They remove some of the tie-off points, which makes this pack smaller. They do not include any guy lines, no tent stakes. And yes, it is lighter weight than the DD model, but it is lacking some features and also size. The company claims this as far as the guy lines and the tent stakes go. The logic behind this is that you can make your own pegs from sticks that you find in the forest, and people will still end up replacing the original guy lines with their favorite cordage. Because they didn't include those items, according to them, they can keep the price lower. Unfortunately, when you look at the price of the DD Hammocks 3 by 3 meter tarp and then you compare it to this, you're not going to see much of a price difference. So that logic there just does not make much sense. I am getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let's slow down here and let's go over some stats real quick. As far as the dimensions go, this is a 98.5 inch by 98.5 inch tarp. In other words, it is an 8.2 feet by 8.2 feet tarp. When the tarp is in the storage bag, it measures 10 inches by 2 inches. The weight of the tarp with the storage bag is 1.2 pounds on my scale. This tarp includes 9 tie-off points, including 1 in the center of the tarp. And it is made from a 190T polyester that has been treated with a polyurethane coating. That gives this tarp a waterproof rating of 3,000 millimeters. Lastly, when it comes to this tarp, this runs $60. Keep that price in mind, my friends. We'll come back to it in just a minute. Those are all of the stats concerning this tarp. Now let's go over my impressions of this so far. My plan is to begin testing this out some, but before I did so, I wanted to shoot this preview, again, because this is an interesting product. It's interesting because of the size, for one. An 8 foot by 8 foot tarp is really small. That's an odd size. Tarps of this size need to be carefully considered before you purchase, as you really have to know what you're doing with this product to use it safely. This, more than anything, is a short duration tarp. If you're going to use this in inclement weather, this is something that you pitch very quickly, basically around you, and it's designed for a short period of time. We're not talking like overnight use or anything like that. Basically, in an emergency or in fair weather. A tarp like this is going to do a good job of blocking the wind, but a poor job at blocking rain and snow, especially if they're being wind driven. You may be wondering why that is. Why does a small tarp not offer that much protection? I answered it right at the beginning. This is a small tarp. You have to consider this, folks. When you're inside of a tarp like this, it's not like you have full protection to every single corner. You have to think about splashback. You have to think about the wind. Even if I'm sitting right here, there's a heavy rain coming down, it's not being wind driven at all. That rain is splattering all over this tarp. There's this mist that's flowing around you. With a tarp of this size in the rain, you cannot pitch it high because you will get wet underneath. That means you have to pitch it low, and that means you're not going to have much space underneath it. My personal preference when it comes to a storm-related tarp is nothing less than 10 foot by 10 foot. If I had the choice, I like 10 foot by 13 feet. A tarp of that size offers you a lot of protection and at the same time, a lot of setup opportunities. You could do a variety of setups, whereas with this, you're going to be limited on what you can do. When I'm out on a trip and I have a tarp with me, I want to be protected and I want comfort all at the same time. I don't want to make any sacrifices. The truth is, you don't have to. There's really no reason to go with a small tarp unless you have some very specific purpose in mind. I have to admit, everyone, I'm not impressed with this tarp. This feels so cheap, and the quality of this is not very good. There's holes here, holes over there, loose threads over here. We do have a seam tape seam across the center here. I do like the fact that the tie-off points have been reinforced with additional threading. In general, as far as quality goes, this is merely okay. You can see the light coming through this. That is not a stitch hole, that's just a hole in the tarp. Over the years, I've heard good things about DD Hammocks and their tarps and whatnot. This is my first experience with one of their products. Again, this was made by DD Hammocks for VARUSTELEKA. I can't say I'm impressed, everyone. These holes here, there's actually 2 or 3 that are not related to the stitching. You have to think of that as a weak point, right? That is going to leak. So if you're underneath this tarp, you just lost 3 inches of protection from the top, because that'll leak. Water will eventually drip through. You can see here in this corner, like, this looks rough. You can tell that they messed up and had to go over the stitching here one additional time. Looking at the center tie-off point here, this is interesting. I'm not sure if I like the way that they've done this. You have 2 points of contact with a gap in the center, so you can see that it really doesn't pitch that well. If you had one center point, that'd be much better than this here. Since we're talking about the tie-off points, the question is 9 enough? And I would say no. The more tie-off points that you can have, the better off you're going to be. When you have more tie-off points, you're allowed to do more setups. In other words, you have more versatility as far as the setups go. With this here, you have 9, which is better than none, but I do wish there was more. As far as the weight goes for this tarp, it's okay. For a tarp of this size with these materials, it's okay. If weight was a priority for you, you can easily find tarps that weigh less, that are also larger than this. These are what I would consider to be very budget materials. Typically what you would find with like Chinese made tarps that you can find for about 20 to 30 bucks. You certainly can have a well-made, strong tarp made from these materials, but oftentimes they're very, very inexpensive. And that takes us over to the value of this tarp. Does $60 make sense for this shelter? And I would say no. When you consider the size of this tarp, when you consider the materials of this tarp, when you consider the fact that you have no guy lines included, no tent stakes included, this should cost like 35, 40 bucks, right? No more than $40. $60, in my opinion, for this tarp, this makes no sense. You could spend $15 more and get the larger DD hammock that includes tent stakes and guy lines. And it's larger. and it has more tie-off points. Why would you choose this over that? The size alone would be worth $15 more. I do like the fact that this tarp comes with a large storage bag. That's going to make putting this tarp back inside of it nice and easy. When it comes to the storage size, it's okay. It's not bad. You do have to consider that this is a tarp made from polyester. So that polyester material, it's heavier, thicker, it takes up more space. If you can fold the tarp and put it inside of the storage bag, it's going to look nice and small. If you have to roll this up, it's not going to be that small. And in fact, it'll look just like this. This tarp here, it's interesting. Interesting price, interesting dimensions. I'm not sure if it makes a lot of sense, and I want to hear from you all. What do you all think? Comment down below. For $60, does this make sense? No guy lines, no tent stakes, made from polyester. For $15 more, you can get the larger DD Hammock Tarp. To me, that makes more sense. Or you could spend $90 instead of $60 and you can get yourself an AquaQuest tarp. Better materials, more waterproof, more tie-off points, and at the same time, lighter weight. But let's say that you don't want to spend $90. You don't want to spend 60 bucks. You could spend $54, get the Bulwark tarp from One Tigris, and you have a tarp that comes with guy lines, tent stakes. It's much, much larger, and it has a ton of tie-off points. To me, those other options make more sense than this tarp here. Even if this tarp turns out to be incredibly waterproof, which we know already will not be the case completely because we have holes in the material. These are just things that you need to consider, folks, and that's why I do these episodes. I'm here to give you all my impressions, my thoughts, point out the issues, and also praise the product when it deserves it. In this case here, I'm just not sure why anybody would pick this product over something else, especially when you look at the features of this tarp, consider the weight of this tarp, the price, and also the questionable quality. And that, my friends, wraps up my preview of this tarp. When I can, when the situation's right, I will get this tarp out and use it. You do have to remember, folks, this is an 8 foot by 8 foot tarp. This is small. It is not going to work. Flat out, it is not going to work in a vast majority of stormy situations. This is going to be good for blocking the wind. It's going to be good for getting out of the rain, out of the snow for a short period of time. This is not a camping tarp. This is just simply too small. Now you may say, Luke, I use an 8 foot by 8 foot tarp all the time. It's my favorite. Good for you. You're not camping in the same situations, the same environments, the same conditions as me. I promise you, folks, a tarp of this size is simply too small unless you're going to pitch that tarp incredibly close to the ground. If you want livable space and protection, you simply need a bigger tarp. A tarp that's going to give you more protection. You have to consider when you have that splashback, right? When you have moisture flowing through the air when the wind is blowing, a tarp like this, you're going to have very little dry space underneath it. And again, that's why you need a larger size tarp. And that wraps it up for my initial preview of this tarp. Make sure to comment down below, share your thoughts. What do you all think about everything that I've shown you concerning this tarp? What do you all think about what I've stated about my personal preferences towards tarps? For myself, my preference is nothing less than 10 foot by 10 foot. A tarp of that size is going to offer you a ton of setup options, a ton of versatility, a ton of protection, and livable space, which is incredibly important for your adventures. Everyone, I am done. Sound off in the comments. Also, before you go, hit the thumbs up. I do appreciate it. Oh yeah. By the way, VARUSTELEKA, DD Hammocks, I'm not impressed. Both of these companies can do better than this. Strength and honor, folks. Bye for now.